Before I begin, I must issue a warning. What I'm about to share is not for the faint-hearted. This is the story of James Blackwood, an ordinary man whose life changed forever on a rainy November night in 2018. A man who, like so many others in Milton Keynes, had heard the rumours about the infamous Devil's Roundabout, but never gave them credence. Until that night, James had been a taxi driver for 15 years. A pragmatic man with both feet firmly on the ground. In his time behind the wheel, he'd seen it all. Drunks, fights, even a berth in the back seat of his car. But nothing prepared him for what would happen in the early hours of 17th November. The rain was relentless over Milton Keynes, turning the streets into black mirrors reflecting the city's lights. It was nearly midnight when James got a call for a fare in the northern part of town. He was about to end his shift, but the address was close to his home. One last job before resting wouldn't hurt. It was when I reached the pickup point that I got the first shiver, James told me, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if reliving the moment. It was a deserted street, and there he was, standing under a flickering street lamp. A tall, thin man, wearing a soaked black overcoat, despite standing there, motionless for God knows how long. The passenger got into the taxi without a word. The strong smell of wet earth and something else, something James couldn't quite place, filled the car. When he asked for the destination, the man replied in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper, "Marlborough Street Roundabout. You know, the way." James knew it, of course. Every driver in Milton Keynes knows the roundabouts, the circular junctions that dot the planned city. But this one had a reputation. Locals called it the Devil's Roundabout, a name born from a series of inexplicable accidents over the years. Some said it was just poor engineering, a treacherous curve. Others spoke of voices, shadows, and unexplained lights. On the way, I tried to make conversation. It's what we do, you know. Talk about the weather, football, anything. But he just stayed silent. Through the rearview mirror, all I could see was his silhouette, his head slightly tilted, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. The radio started to fail as they neared the destination. Static, followed by snippets of old songs, distorted voices. James tried to turn it off, but it kept coming back on, louder each time. That's when I noticed something was wrong with the GPS too. The screen was flickering, and the pointer was spinning wildly, like it couldn't pinpoint our location. And then he spoke again. "We're almost there. Can you feel it?" James didn't answer. What he was feeling was a cold that seemed to radiate from the back seat. A cold no heater could fend off. The rain was now hammering furiously against the windows, making visibility almost nil. When they finally reached the roundabout, James stopped the car. "That'll be 7:50, he said, wanting nothing more than for the stranger to get out of his taxi. But when he looked in the back seat, there was no one there. I thought I was going mad. I got out of the car, looked around, called out. The rain was still falling, but lighter. There was no one on the street, just the sound of water running down the drain. That's when I noticed something in the middle of the roundabout. James crossed the empty road, drawn by something he couldn't explain. In the center of the roundabout was a small patch of green with a few trees, and there, under the faint light of a distant street lamp, he saw it was like a man, but not quite. The shape was human, but there was something wrong with the proportions, with the way it moved. It was standing with its back to me, motionless, staring at the ground. I called out, asked if it was my passenger, if they needed. When it turned, James stopped speaking at this point in our. His hands were. I told him to continue, only if he felt comfortable. After a few minutes he went. The face, it wasn't it was like someone had tried to make a human face without ever seeing. The eyes were black, completely black, and there was a smile that stretched too far, far beyond what's possible. And then it spoke, in the same hoarse voice as the "You brought me back!" James doesn't remember how he got back to his next clear moment was driving at full speed away from that, his heart pounding, so hard he thought it might. When he got home, he locked all the doors and didn't sleep that. In the days that followed, the nightmares began. Always the same. Him driving through the rain, with someone in the back seat whispering, and always ending at the roundabout with that figure. A week later, he decided to investigate. He needed to understand what had happened, or he'd lose his mind. That's when he found out about the accident. In November 1988, exactly 30 years earlier, a man named Richard Harlow had died at that same roundabout. He'd been driving, alone on a rainy night when he lost control and crashed into a lamppost. Old photos from the local paper showed a tall, thin man wearing a dark overcoat. I'd never heard of him before that night, never seen his face. How could I have made something like that up? But the most disturbing coincidence was yet to come. James discovered that before the accident, Richard Harlow had made a call for a taxi that never arrived. It's like, for 30 years, he'd been waiting for a taxi that never came. And that night, I showed up. James never drove after midnight again. He sold his taxi 6 months after the incident, and now works as a daytime security guard. He avoids going near the roundabout, taking long detours if necessary. People don't believe me. They think I've gone mad or made it all up. But I know what I saw, and I know it's still there. Sometimes when it rains hard, I get the feeling someone's watching me through the window, and when I look, I see only the reflection of the rain. But I know it's him, waiting for me to take him back. James's story could be dismissed as delusion, trauma, or mere invention. But 2 months after our meeting, I received an email from him with a photo attached. It was a clipping from a 1988 newspaper, showing the scene of Richard Harlow's accident. And there, in the corner of the image, partially visible, was a taxi parked across the street. The model was old, but the number plate was perfectly legible, the same as the taxi James was driving in 2018. How is this possible? James has no answer, nor do I. All I know is that I haven't driven past the Devil's Roundabout after dark since, and I suggest that if you ever visit Milton Keynes, you do the same. Some questions are better left unanswered, and some roads are better not travelled alone. After first publishing this story on a small blog about unexplained phenomena in Buckinghamshire, I received 3 more accounts from drivers who had similar experiences at the same roundabout. All described the same tall man in an overcoat. All mentioned the intense cold that filled the vehicle, and all reported that after the experience, they began suffering from the same recurring nightmare. What disturbs me most, however, is that 2 weeks ago, while researching more about Richard Harlow's case for this video, I discovered something James didn't know. Richard wasn't just an ordinary victim of a traffic accident. In the 1980s, he had been the prime suspect in the disappearance of 3 young women in Milton Keynes. The investigations were halted after his death. The bodies were never found. What did James bring back on that rainy November night? And more importantly, is it truly confined to that roundabout? Or is it now free to wander beyond? I don't have all the answers, but one thing I know, there are places where the veil between this world and another is the Devil's Roundabout in Milton Keynes seems to be one. And if you ever find yourself driving there on a rainy night and see a tall man in a dark overcoat hitchhiking, please don't stop. There are stories that should never be told. Fragments of reality so unsettling that, once known, they cannot be forgotten. The case of Emily Winters is one such story. Emily was a brilliant student at the University of Buckingham, 22 years old, red hair, green eyes, and a promising future in psychology. Her friends described her as methodical, rational, and firmly grounded. If there was anyone who didn't believe in ghosts or superstitions, it was Emily. Her roommate Sarah told me when I interviewed. In January 2020, Emily began working on her dissertation about collective hysteria and urban legends. Her research led her to investigate various local stories, including the infamous Devil's Roundabout in Milton Keynes. It seemed like just another academic project. Until everything changed. It was around February that I noticed the change, Sarah recounted. Emily always came back to the dorm before dark. Suddenly, she started arriving late, sometimes after midnight. When I asked where she'd been, she'd just say, field research. Emily's notebooks, which I was able to examine with her family's permission, reveal a disturbing transformation. The early entries are objective, scientific analyses of how urban legends spread and affect communities. But gradually, the writing changes. It becomes frantic, obsessive. One entry in particular, dated 12th of February, stands out. Visited the roundabout again today. Third night in a row. This time, I brought the recording equipment. The locals are right about the electromagnetic anomalies. My devices fail at the same spot every time, 11:47 p.m. Coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences anymore. The following pages contain transcripts of interviews with locals, including a brief account from a taxi driver named James, the same man whose testimony I shared earlier. Emily was clearly following the same trail as I did. By 20th of February, Emily's writing had become almost illegible. I saw him in the center of the roundabout, exactly as James described. But there's more. He's not alone. There are others. And they know my name. How do they know my name? Sarah says that in the weeks that followed, Emily changed drastically. She stopped attending classes. She covered the walls of her room with maps of Milton Keynes, old newspaper clippings, and photographs of the roundabout taken at different times of day. She barely slept. When she did, she'd wake up screaming about someone calling her name, asking to be taken home. On the 3rd of March, Emily left a note for Sarah. Don't wait up. I found the truth. I need to check one last thing. That was the last time anyone saw her. The Buckinghamshire police began searching the next day. They found her car abandoned about 100 meters from the Devil's Roundabout. Inside the vehicle was a digital recorder, still running. I obtained a copy of the recording through a police contact, on the condition that I not share it in full. What I can describe is this. The first 20 minutes are just the sound of the car engine and Emily's breathing. Occasionally, she makes verbal notes about the time and location. At 11:40 p.m., she parks the car and continues recording while walking, approaching the roundabout now. The temperature has dropped significantly. The sky is clear, but there's a sort of low mist forming just in this area. Footsteps. Her breathing grows faster. There's someone in the center of the roundabout. Just like the other nights. I'm going to get closer. Silence for almost a minute. Then, my God, it's not just one. I can see at least 3 figures. Are they holding hands? I can't make it out clearly. I'll try to take a photo. The sound of a camera click. Shit. The phone camera isn't working. None of the electronics are... Wait! They're looking at me now. All of them. No! Don't come closer! Rapid footsteps. Emily is clearly running. They're following me. How can they move so fast? I need to get to the car. A muffled scream. Then the sound of something falling. Presumably the recorder. For several minutes there's only the sound of the wind. And then, very faintly, almost imperceptible, a hoarse male voice that doesn't belong to Emily. We've finally found the perfect replacement. She'll take us home. The recording continues for another hour. But there are no more discernible sounds beyond the occasional wind. The police filed the case as missing person under unexplained circumstances. The official theory is that Emily suffered some kind of psychotic breakdown, abandoned the recorder, and fled. Perhaps she's living under another identity somewhere. That's what her family prefers to believe. But there's a detail the police never made public. Something I discovered only 3 months ago, when I finally gained access to Emily's camera. Found among her belongings, the last photo taken at 11:47 p.m. that night is almost completely black. But if you increase the brightness and contrast, as I did, you can make out the center of the roundabout. And there, in a circle, are not 3 but 4 figures holding hands. One is unmistakably a tall man in a dark overcoat, the same figure James described, and the 4th figure on the far right. She has red. 3 weeks after Emily's disappearance, a student named Rachel Phillips reported being approached by a young red-haired woman near the university. She seemed disoriented, with a distant look in her eyes, Rachel said. She asked me what day it was, and when I answered, she laughed in a strange way. Said she'd been trapped for years, but had found a way to come back for brief moments. Then she warned me never to go near the Devil's Roundabout after dark, because they're always looking for replacement. I thought it was some sick prank, until I saw Emily's photo on the news days later. It was her. I'm absolutely certain. Rachel was the only person to report an encounter with someone resembling Emily after her disappearance. The police investigated, but with no further evidence, her account was deemed unreliable. As for Emily's belongings, Sarah told me that when the family came to collect her things, all the maps, clippings and photographs had vanished from the wall. Only one item remained, a small black and white photograph of the Devil's Roundabout, dated 1988, showing the site of Richard Harlowe's act. On the back, in Emily's handwriting, was just, "We found the door. Now we need a guide." I visited the dorm where Emily lived, spoke to her friends, read her journals, and listened to her final recording. I followed her steps as far as I could, but there's one place I don't dare go. That roundabout after dark. Something tells me that if I did, I might find Emily. But I'm not sure it would only be her I'd find, or if I'd make it back to tell the story. The official investigation into Emily Winter's disappearance was closed in October 2020. No body, no concrete evidence of a crime, no answers. Just questions, and a roundabout that's still there, as it always has been, spinning people toward destinations they might not have imagined when they entered it. And while researching for this video, I uncovered something disturbing. In the last 5 years, 3 other people have vanished near that roundabout, all on different nights, with no apparent connection between them, except for one detail. In each case, witnesses reported briefly seeing a young woman with red hair nearby, just before the disappearances. A coincidence? Perhaps. Or maybe Emily has become part of something bigger than herself, something that waits patiently at the Devil's Roundabout for its next passenger. It's not easy to share what I'm about to reveal. My name is Dr. William Parker, and for 20 years I worked as a paranormal investigator. Though I prefer the term debunker, my career was built on exposing frauds, explaining seemingly supernatural phenomena with science and reason. I published 4 books and became known across the UK as the man who didn't believe in ghosts. That is, until 3 months ago, I came across the stories about the Devil's Roundabout in Milton Keynes the same way you likely did. Through online accounts, local rumours, tales that seemed too far-fetched to be true. A taxi driver haunted by a passenger who died decades earlier. A student vanishing mysteriously while investigating an urban legend. Classic British ghost stories, I thought. The kind of tale I debunked hundreds of times before. I decided to investigate as part of my new series on British urban legends. At first, I approached it methodically, as I always had. I researched historical records of accidents at that roundabout. And yes, there's a statistically unusual number of them. I interviewed locals, including some who claimed to have seen strange figures in the centre of the junction after dark. I set up night vision cameras, electromagnetic field meters, high-sensitivity audio recorders, everything properly scientific. My first night of observation was entirely uneventful. I sat in my car, parked about 50 meters from the roundabout, monitoring the equipment. The occasional car passed by. Nothing out of the ordinary. The instruments detected no anomalies. Exactly as I expected. On the second night, I noticed something curious. At precisely 11:47 p.m., all my electronic devices failed simultaneously. The cameras shut off. The meters reset. It lasted only 30 seconds. I attributed it to a possible localized power dip or electromagnetic interference from some nearby source. Annoying, but explained. It was the third night that changed everything. I arrived early, around 10 p.m., and set up additional equipment, including a thermal camera. The night was unusually cold for May, and a low mist had formed, limiting visibility. I remember checking my watch repeatedly as we neared 11:47. Let's see if it happens again, I muttered into my record. At 11:45 p.m., I noticed the first anomaly. The temperature around the car dropped sharply. The digital thermometer recorded a 12-degree plunge in under a minute. The thermal camera showed an odd pattern. The center of the roundabout appeared as a dark blue spot, significantly colder than its surroundings. At 11:46 p.m., the mist began to gather in the center of the roundabout, forming a circular pattern that couldn't be explained by natural air currents. I switched on the video camera and started narrating what I saw. The mist formation is unusual, but likely has a meteorological explanation, possibly related to the temperature difference I'm At 11:47 p.m., as expected, all electronic devices shut off. But this time, something else happened. The streetlights around the roundabout began to flicker. And then, I saw them. In the center of the junction, partially obscured by the mist, At first, I thought they might be pedestrians, perhaps teenagers playing a prank on the ghost. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized there was something profoundly wrong. They moved unnaturally, as if each motion was fragmented. They were standing in a circle, holding hands. 4 figures. A tall man in an overcoat, a young woman with red hair, and 2 others I couldn't make out. My scientific training urged me to observe, to record, to avoid jumping to conclusions, but a more primal part of my brain was screaming at me to start the car and get out of there as fast as possible. I ignored both impulses and did something that, in hindsight, was incredibly foolish. I got out of the car. The air was freezing, biting. My breath formed thick white clouds in front of me. I started walking slowly toward the roundabout, clutching a torch that thankfully still worked. "Hello," I called. "Can I help you?" The circle of figures stopped moving. Slowly, all four heads turned toward me in disturbing unison. The mist between us seemed to thicken, but I could still see enough. A few meters from the edge of the roundabout, I stopped. Something prevented me from going further. Some deep instinct for self-preservation, I suppose. That's when one of the figures broke from the group and began walking toward me. It was the young woman with red hair. Even from a distance, I recognized her from the photographs I'd seen during my research. Emily Winters. Impossible, of course. She'd vanished over a year ago. And yet, there she was, walking toward me with erratic steps, as if relearning how to move. When she was about 3 meters away, she stopped. Her face. There was something wrong with her face. The features were Emily's, but the expression, the movements were like a poorly crafted imitation of humanity. William Parker. It wasn't a question. She knew my name. "You came to see if we're real." Her voice had a strange quality, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison, slightly out of sync. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. "We want what you want." Answer. She tilted her head unnaturally. "But some questions, once answered, cannot be forgotten." "Where's the real Emily?" I asked. A strange smile spread across her face, too wide, revealing teeth that seemed slightly pointed under the beam of my torch. "Emily is here. Emily is everywhere. Emily found the truth about this place." "And what's the truth?" I pressed. "This roundabout wasn't built on ordinary ground. Before Milton Keynes existed, there was a stone circle here, far older than Stonehenge. A gateway. The city planners didn't know, of course. No one did, except the ancient. They knew what happens when you build a circle on top of another circle. You create a passage." She took a step toward me. I stepped back instinctively. "A passage to where?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "To the space between worlds, where time works differently." She pointed to the 3 figures in the center of the roundabout. "Richard has been here for nearly 40 years, by your time. To him, it's been centuries. Emily arrived recently, and there are others. So many others." "What do you want?" I asked again. "Isn't it obvious?" Another step toward. "We want out, but we need replacements. A balance must be maintained. Someone leaves, someone stays." I took another step back, nearly tripping. "You'd be perfect, William." A skeptic, someone who scoffed at us. Poetic justice, don't you think? Richard waited so long for a taxi. Emily for a professor who'd understand her research, and she paused. "I am neither Richard nor Emily. I am far, far older." At that moment, the torch in my hand flickered and went out. For a second, I was in complete darkness. When it came back on, the face before me was no longer Emily. It was something indescribably ancient, something wearing a human form, like an ill-fitting disguise. I don't remember running back to the car. I don't remember driving away. My next clear moment of awareness was being in my hotel, locked in the bathroom, trembling uncontrollably. In the mirror, my face was pale, my eyes, and in my pocket, a piece of paper I didn't recall picking up. On it, written in an old-fashioned script, "Now you know, and once you know, you become part of it. We will meet again, William." We'd abandoned the investigation that same. I left all the equipment behind, paid the hotel, and drove non-stop to London. I tried to convince myself it had been a hallucination, perhaps caused by sleep deprivation, or some gas released from the soil in that area. but the words on the paper and the dreams I've started, dreams where I'm trapped in a circle of ancient stones under a starry sky I don't recognize, are too vivid to. A week after the incident, I received an anonymous email containing only a link to a 1967 newspaper article. Long before Milton Keynes was built, the article reported the discovery by archaeologists of an ancient stone circle in the area where the city would later be constructed. The stones were removed to facilitate urban development, but the article mentioned a local legend about it was said to be a place where people vanished, especially on moonless. At the end of the article, a quote from an archaeologist. These stones are over 5,000 years old. Whoever placed them here knew something about astronomy. They're perfectly aligned with certain celestial events, but there's something else. Something we don't fully understand. The inscriptions on the stones speak of a passage of beings that are neither human nor gods, waiting on the other side. I haven't returned to Milton Keynes since. I haven't published my findings anywhere except in this video. I have no concrete evidence. All the electronic equipment failed at the critical moment, as I now know it always does at 11:47 p.m. in that place. But I know what I saw, and now, so do you. This is my advice, and I don't give it lightly. If you're ever driving through Milton Keynes and past the Devil's Roundabout, don't stop. Don't look at the center. And above all, never ever visit that place at 11:47 p.m. Because I now know the truth about that roundabout. It's not just a place where accidents happen with unusual frequency. It's a gateway, a rift between worlds. And on the other side, something waits. Something ancient and patient that has learned to use our forms, our voices, our memories. Something that now knows my name. And perhaps after watching this video, it knows yours too. If this account gave you the chills as much as it did me while investigating, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Share it with friends who enjoy authentic British horror stories. And in the comments, tell me, have you ever had an inexplicable experience at a roundabout or junction? Are there places in your town that everyone avoids without quite knowing why? Remember, some legends persist because they contain fragments of truth, and some roads lead to places that don't appear on any map. Until the next video, and be careful on the roads after dark.